Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Surrey says Metro Vancouver no longer works as a regional authority. It has withdrawn from the regional district's 2050 growth strategy, blaming rising costs and, quote, scope creep. We'll talk to Municipal Affairs Minister Ravi Kahlon and ask you, does the regional district still work? Has Metro Vancouver gotten too big? Plus, as Black History Month continues, we'd love to hear you share your personal histories as a Black Canadian in BC. We'll talk to a man whose great-grandfather escaped on the Underground Railroad. Love to hear from you after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Surrey says it can make decisions on its own and that the broader regional authority no longer works. The city has pulled out of Metro Vancouver's regional growth strategy, and it blames a, quote, cumbersome system. It says it imposes rising costs on Surrey's citizens. Metro Vancouver says since 1996, its member jurisdictions have had a regional growth strategy that has been instrumental in shaping the livable region we have today, end quote. Earlier, I spoke with Ravi Kahlon, BC's Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs. I'd like to ask you about Metro Vancouver in a moment, but a vote yesterday at the City of Vancouver, city councillors voted in favor of Mayor Ken Sim's motion to freeze construction of net new supportive housing in the city. What do you think of that?
Well, disappointing. I find it disappointing because the reality is supportive housing works. It takes people that are in encampments, that are sleeping in parks, sleeping in front of businesses, into housing and gives them hope. We've seen it work in communities throughout the province, and it's a vitally important piece of addressing homelessness in our communities. The decision is disappointing. I get some comfort knowing that the projects that we have in the queue with the city will continue to go forward. And so we're going to continue our advocacy, continue to make the case to continue to support vulnerable people, whether it's in Vancouver or Metro Vancouver or any part of the province.
I guess jurisdiction is becoming a real concern among municipalities. And here we have now the city of Surrey saying we're going to pull out of the Metro Vancouver 2050 regional growth strategy. And this is because we feel there has been scope overcreep and the rising concerns around costs at Metro Vancouver. Let's just hear what Surrey Councillor Linda Annis had to say on the coast with Gloria Makarenko.
Well, we know all of the issues that have been taking place lately at Metro, and Metro initially started off providing water and sewer services in the Metro region, and they've had such scope creep on so many issues, everything from housing to parks to, you name it, and they seem to be dabbling their fingers into it. And quite frankly, I don't think the model is working. I think cities know what's best for cities, and they need to leave it up to us to plan our growth strategy.
Minister, is Metro Vancouver still effective?
I would say to Surrey, to any community, is solutions are found at the table. I appreciate right now Metro's got some challenges, and it's easy to walk away, politically easy to walk away, to say, hey, that's a problem over there and we don't want to be part of it. But what we actually need is all of our leaders to take a leadership role, get at the table and find solutions. When it comes to the growth strategy, we know that Surrey had amendments made to it in 2022. They brought forward amendments. They felt that they needed to make changes. It was accepted. I understand tomorrow they're bringing additional changes, which will likely get supported. And that's how we are going to get good outcomes for the region. But they need to work together. They need to work together to ensure we have water, we have sewer, we have all these things, and it's done in a coordinated way. And so my urging to Surrey and to all communities is stay at the table, find solutions. There's always giving up a little bit and taking something, but there's ways forward, and they can only be resolved at the table.
But water and sewer, those are the things that Councillor Annis said were supposed to be the purview of Metro Vancouver. Now that seems to have expanded and expanded, has it gotten too big? And given the challenges of a city like Surrey that is growing at such a rapid pace, is it too big for what it can sustain?
Well, I think if there's a concern around the scope of work, there's a governance review about to happen. We as a province said we would participate in the governance review as long as it included salaries of members that serve on the board, and they've agreed to that. So the governance review is a place to actually look at all the things that they're doing. And it's fair to ask questions. Should Metro be doing housing? Should they be into parks? Should be, involved in, attracting investments? All fair questions that mayors can have a conversation about. But the way you do it is by doing the governance review to assess what programs that they have and make some decisions, not walking away. Again, I don't think Surrey wants to walk away from Metro because it wouldn't make sense. Surrey doesn't have sewer facilities, doesn't have water facilities, doesn't have a garbage dump. They're going to have to go back to Metro anyways. I don't think that's what the mayor certainly was referring to. The best way, again, is to resolve the issues at the table. I do think there's a path there. People just got to get to work.
Could you step in if that were to happen? Could you step in as municipal affairs minister?
There's always options available, but at this point, I don't see the need to. I appreciate there's local governments that have some frustrations with some of the things that have happened at Metro. But I keep reiterating this, but you got to get to the table and you got to resolve them. The governance review will go a long way to, I think, give mayors and people in our community some comfort on salaries. It'll give us some comfort on what work they're doing and what they shouldn't be doing, as well as having a look at all the projects, the infrastructure projects they have going. So it's a comprehensive review, and I think that's where the path will be to find a resolution on this.
Surrey City Councillor Linda Anna said, we want to make our own decisions as a city, but we need help. And it's not going to be from Metro Vancouver. It needs to be from the province and the federal government. We need funding for schools to keep up with the rising population. Our hospital, there is another hospital on the way that's a smaller one. We need transit improvement. Those are things that need to come from the province. What do you say to that?
Well, the largest investments in the province are happening in Surrey right now. We have a massive expansion of transit going through multiple stations in Surrey. We have a brand new hospital under construction, not a small one, a significant hospital with a cancer center. The fastest growth of new schools being brought online are there. We provided Surrey close to $90 million for infrastructure. We don't know yet where they've invested all those dollars. They haven't made that public. And so I agree that Surrey's growing. They continue to need more supports, and we're going to be there. But we also are doing a significant amount in the community that shouldn't be overlooked.
Minister, while I have you, federal international news breaking as well today. Donald Trump, U.S. President, in the news once again, confirming on social media that tariffs on Canadian goods, most Canadian goods of 25% will be going forward on March 4th. What does the province say to that? Are you prepared for March 4th?
Well, we're only in the afternoon, so there's probably a time for at least 3 or 4 different tweets and different messages coming from the U.S. administration still. It's really challenging for us. The message continues to change from the administration to the president themselves. And so that's a reminder, I think, for not us, but all of us across the country, that we have to be prepared for this for the next 4 years and maybe longer. Our relationship with the U.S. has fundamentally changed. I would argue that the relationship with the U.S. with the European Union has fundamentally changed, as well as South American countries. So that means we have to do the work, no matter if the tariffs come next week, a month from now, a year from now. We have to strengthen our local economies and diversify to new markets. And that's the work we're doing right now.
March 4th is also BC Budget Day. So how has the province prepared a budget for that uncertainty? What can people expect on Tuesday?
Certainly a difficult task for Minister Bailey as Minister of Finance, as it is for finance ministers across the country, given the uncertainties. We know that tariffs will hurt families on BC side. In fact, we're already seeing impacts of it. We're seeing financial decisions being made that are being impacted by the constant threats. And so it's a very challenging time to make a budget, but Minister Bailey has got her eye on the prize, and what will be fundamentally core to what the budget is presented will be that supports for people will there. We're going to continue to have investments in healthcare and education, ensuring that we have housing built. That is a core that will not change, and we'll have to adjust as we see what comes from the Trump administration.
Minister Kahlon, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
That's Ravi Kahlon, Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs. Well, we are talking about the Metro Vancouver Regional Authority, and the city of Surrey has voted to withdraw from its regional growth strategy. And we're asking you, since what the city councillors from Surrey, we heard from Councillor Linda Annis, who said it's taken on too much. There's this scope creep at the regional district, and that is no longer functioning. And the costs are rising, and they're having to be imposed on the citizens of Surrey. She raised issues around high pay for mayors who are directors on the board of Metro Vancouver. She raised the issue of the controversial cost overruns at the North Shore wastewater treatment plant, and those concerns were part of that decision. So we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Does Metro Vancouver still work in solving regional issues? Has it gotten too big? And how do you think municipalities can then work together on those issues, housing, transportation? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also just hit pound 690 on your phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Chad Pawson is back with me, our municipal affairs reporter. Hi, Chad.
Hello again, Michelle.
Hello again. What do you make of what you're hearing on today's news, hearing about the Metro Vancouver? What is the issue there?
Yeah, so this is essentially years in the making, Michelle. This is Metro Vancouver provides our drinking water and deals with our waste, liquid and solid. That's its core responsibilities for our region. And they process like 1 billion liters of water a day, and they process 1.2 billion liters of liquid waste a day. But over the course of its history, it's taken on more responsibilities in the region: regional parks, housing, transportation issues, zero waste initiatives. I could go on and on and on. And I think what's happening as we see cost overruns with particularly these wastewater treatment plants, people are questioning, well, Metro, if you're having trouble managing your core values, should you be taking on these extra responsibilities? They spend money on the P&E. I think last week, some people may have saw in the news, there's this review going on within Metro Vancouver. They looked at some of the services they did. They actually pulled some funding back from the Fraser Basin Council, which does work around watersheds and salmon habitat. They pulled that money away. They're really looking, they're very sensitive right now. Should we be spending in all these areas? Directors, of which there are 41 from across our region, are grappling with these issues. But it really comes down to, how do we get value for money out of Metro Vancouver? Should it just do its core mandates, which is water, liquid waste, solid waste, or is there other opportunities for our regional government in our big growing region to take on responsibilities that fall into the gaps between municipal governance, provincial governance, and federal governance? So that's the issue. It's a tough one to look at when we see a wastewater treatment plant on the North Shore go from a $700 million price tag to a $3.86 billion price tag, of which everyone in Metro Vancouver is paying for. And some of those bills are arriving now.
Right.
The North Shore is paying for more, but people in Surrey, people in Burnaby, people in Vancouver are also seeing that on their bills.
And so when we think about, I was about to ask you, why should people care about this? Why is this something that affects, a regular citizen? It's those costs, I suppose.
Absolutely. We're talking about hundreds of dollars a year. So over the grand scheme of things, per month, it's, it can be quite reasonable, but it's very much a cost overrun for this wastewater treatment plant. We all have to pay for somewhat. And Metro's not done. They also have other wastewater treatment plants. Iona needs to be renewed, which is an even more expensive program than the North Shore one. So these costs are going to continue to come. We're in a period where inflation is high. It's very difficult to find labor to build these things. It's more expensive to find the material to build these things. Of course, you've talked about it. The tariffs are not helping. These threatened tariffs from the U.S. are not helping about how we're going to buy materials to build these things. So there's so much escalation. Local politicians are facing a lot of pressure, the Metro itself, under the guidance of its chair, Mike Hurley, the mayor of Burnaby, I mean, he's very committed to a governance review at Metro level.
Right.
The board is already taking some steps. Like I said, they're looking at their spending. They're looking at an even earlier date at next year's budget. They're trying to engage residents to give them feedback. So they are savvy to some of the complaints going on here. But now you're seeing politics get into it. You're seeing Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim saying, I'm not going to attend any more of these meetings because I don't believe in Metro Vancouver. Now now you see Surrey saying we're going to pull out of a 2050 growth strategy that was voted on, and Surrey voted for it 2 years ago in 2023. Interestingly, Michelle, Surrey Mayor at the time, Doug McCallum, didn't like the growth strategy. But then Mayor Brenda Law came in and they were managed to find some dialogue, and they did vote for it in the end. But now they're voting to pull out of it. Mike Hurley wants to work with Surrey to figure out what the problem is and also try to find a way to keep Surrey in it. They said in the 30 years of doing this type of growth planning, they've never had a member pull out of it. They don't even know what that means and what it would do. They're asking the province to figure out what would it mean for Surrey to pull out of these growth strategies, which are required by the province for regional governments to do.
I'm wondering how these municipalities can then work together, because there's growth, which is what this strategy is supposed to address, and we have people who work in who live in Surrey, work in Vancouver. There's cross-regional cooperation that is needed. How are they supposed to work together if you have people who say this body that we're doing this work through is not efficient?
It's a tough question, because Metro Vancouver's set up to do that exact job, to be able to bring together these local governance and have them look for the best things for the region. And Mike Hurley is very much selling that the Metro Vancouver is not broken. It needs to be renewed.
He says it is efficient, yeah.
And needs to be, yes, made more efficient, and that he needs all partners to participate. And so he wants people to participate. Just quickly, you know, Surrey says it's going to do a Fraser, or it's going to do its own kind of regional governance get together and figure out what's the best thing for Surrey and its neighboring communities. But again, will that be efficient? And then having to discuss with Metro Vancouver. It seems complicated. We don't have a lot of details at present. The takeaway is that their people are unhappy and they're looking for a better way forward, and they're making moves to try and achieve that.
Is that like its own police force? Is that it's a whole separate issue?
Michelle.
I know, a whole different can of worms.
How much time do we have?
Let's put out the phone numbers once again: 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And love to hear from you, especially if you live in Metro Vancouver. What are your thoughts about the regional district? Is it still working in terms of addressing regional issues? And how can municipalities do that work together in order to address issues like housing and transportation? What are you looking for? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I think we have a caller coming in, so we're just waiting for that right now.
Yeah, I think, you know, what's interesting here, Michelle, and be interesting here from callers to talk about is, you know, is it the core value or core services and the only thing they're interested in paying for? Or do we want a robust regional park system? Do we want, Metro Vancouver as a region to figure out ways to reduce our waste, to manage our landfills? So you can see how things can build out. Should they play a role in creating affordable housing in our region, or is that the job of the province more so? Metro Vancouver also has a thing called Invest Vancouver, I believe it's called. Invest Vancouver, Invest Metro Vancouver. It's a body that's trying to draw investment into, and that's created some controversy, saying, why are we doing this when other levels of government are trying to draw business and investment to Vancouver and to the region?
What about the province? What is the role for the province here? Because I asked Minister Kahlon, you know, what would you do? He says, Surrey's not talking about pulling out of Metro Vancouver altogether. It is just the regional growth strategy.
Right.
And that he is urging them to come to the table. But, you know, at the same time, what Surrey is saying, what Councillor Annis has said, is that what we need is help from the province and the federal government to accommodate the growth that we have when it comes to housing and schools and hospitals. So what is the role for the provincial government here?
Yeah, I think the takeaway that's going through my mind is that the municipalities are feeling so squeezed with their finances and their budgets, and they often say we're being asked to do things that aren't the mandate of local governments, such as building housing. Sure, they make land available and do rezonings to allow housing, but actual funding housing, they can't do that. They need the province to help out with that, whether that's the type of housing we've been talking for days here in Vancouver,
right.
Supportive housing, social housing, that sort of thing. They need partnership with the province. So of course, when you talk to the province, they say that they're spending historic amounts of money in communities to build new hospitals, Surrey being an example, and build this type of housing. But they too are feeling the squeeze. Of course, we're looking at a massive deficit with the province, $9 billion. We're looking at a budget for them to table next week about what the path forward is ahead. So again, it seems like years of problems are compounding themselves at this time with municipal governments, how they're navigating the needs of their residents and the help they need to get from the province. The province says it is supportive, but it only has so many funds itself. So it's always a squeeze. And I think that's why it comes back to these governance reviews. What is the most important thing that we should be working on and spending our money on?
Let's hear from Mike in Victoria. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about Metro Vancouver?
About Metro Vancouver, well, they got a whole pile of problems. But Victoria is exactly the same thing. I don't know, we've got 13 municipalities that can't manage to get along. And it makes everything difficult, from housing to medical situation, roads, everything. And I know my family lives in North Van. I got 5 members of my family that live up there. And their situation is exactly the same as ours.
Wow, it's interesting to bring up
money.
the regional authority there in the Greater Victoria Regional Authority.
It's a nightmare. We wanted a train to go out to Langford, and Oak Bay turned it down. And they don't really have anything to do with it. And I know the same thing happens in Vancouver. One municipality pulls out of a situation, and the rest are left stranded.
How do you move forward on those issues like expanding transit? Mike, thank you so much. Great to hear from you and hear that Victoria perspective. Chad, I just have about 20 seconds left. There's a vote tomorrow, right?
So a big board meeting at Metro Vancouver tomorrow. And the big takeaway there is there's a massive motion from Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West. He wants to, as you talked about, pull back half the stipends paid to directors, cut committee levels in half. So we're going to see how that goes tomorrow. That's only a small part. I'm hearing from other directors of this governance review. And that if Metro is going to take on responsibility, it needs the committees and oversights to do it. So I'm expecting actually quite a bit of back and forth tomorrow at this meeting.
Yeah. Chad Pawson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Chad Pawson is CBC's municipal affairs reporter. I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, wherever you are in the province, what are your thoughts about the role of that regional district? And we heard as well this morning from, by the way, our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. This morning we did hear from Burnaby Mayor Mike Hurley, who's also chair of the Metro Vancouver Regional District. He spoke to Stephen Quinn on the early edition.
Well, it's really critical to the work that we do together to manage the growth coming to this region. And we've got to work together so that we can organize and deliver the critical infrastructure that's needed. And we all know the costs of those things are getting higher and higher, no matter what we try to do. And, it's still a much more efficient model. And in many ways, Metro Vancouver is the envy of many other areas around because of the way we've been able to structure and manage the growth and the urban containment boundaries that we have. And we've been able to work through all our differences. Even when Surrey were reluctant to sign on to 2050, we worked together to get to a place that we felt they were satisfied, and they must have been satisfied because they signed on. And, that's what we do as a region. We work through our differences. We don't always, I've been on the wrong side of many votes at Metro Vancouver, and you move on and you take it that the majority of those votes are done for the right reasons.
Mike Hurley is chair of the Metro Vancouver Regional District, the mayor of Burnaby. Heather writes, the bottom line, the whole lower mainland is grossly overpopulated, people not doing their part to reduce the amount of garbage and water they're using. Another email here from David, who writes, as an urban planning and urban geography scholar, I have some very strong views on the importance of metropolitan governance. Urban regions around the globe have devised metropolitan level authorities and vested them with diverse powers. So why wouldn't we do that in the lower mainland? Metro Vancouver has 21 different municipalities. Their priorities and investments will vary at the local level. So there's a clear need for coordination of governance and services at the regional or metro level. In the Lower Mainland, there are multiple issues, transportation, infrastructure. Arguably, Metro in many ways should take on more responsibilities in key areas like housing, but it does need democratic and, of course, some clearer financial accountability. David, always good to hear from you on the email. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. It is 12:31 now, and this is BC Today on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. And coming up, we're going to get the latest on the U.S. tariffs. President Donald Trump saying they are going to take place. The sweeping 25% tariffs will come in on March 4th, on Tuesday. We're going to get the latest on that. And we'll also talk about Black History Month. And we would love to hear from you and your personal histories as a Black Canadian living in British Columbia. My guest is coming up, and he's sharing his own personal history, and he says there's not a lot of awareness here in BC. So why is that important to you? Why is sharing that information and education important to you? We'll have that conversation coming up after this CBC News update with Amelia John.
Michelle, BC's housing minister says he is disappointed with Vancouver City Council's decision to approve a plan to pause net new supportive housing on the downtown east side. As we heard earlier in the show, Ravi Kahlon says supportive housing works to give people a second chance. Mayor Ken Sim's office says the city will now focus on renewing aging, deteriorating stock, and transition temporary modular housing into permanent homes while pushing for more supply elsewhere in the region. The BC Prosecution Service has confirmed charges were stayed earlier this month against two men in connection with a shooting in Fort Nelson. RCMP previously said that Jared Bacon had been charged with aggravated assault, while another man named John Chase faced an assault charge in connection with the January 29th shooting. Bacon has been identified by police and in the courts as one of the leaders of the Red Scorpions, a drug trafficking group tied to BC's gang war. BC's longest-serving mayor has died. Alice Maitland was first elected to Hazelton Council in 1965. 11 years later, she became mayor, held the chain of office for the next 42 years. Alice Maitland was 91 years old. In the BC forecast on the north coast today, a mix of sun and cloud, chance of showers, high near 7 degrees. In the Peace, mainly sunny, windy, high of 10. In the central interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 10 as well. Much of the same in the West Kootenay, 10 degrees, mix of sun and cloud, high around 11 in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, sun and cloud with a high of 12. And on the south coast, cloudy with a chance of showers and a high of 11 degrees. And that's the CBC News from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and welcome to CBC.
Thank you.
You know, I know you've been here a little while, but have you gotten used to saying CBC and not ABC?
Still getting the hang of it. Used to saying Australian Broadcasting Corporation, but
yes,
I'm getting there, hopefully.
And you worked there for quite a while. You're from BC.
Yeah.
Immigrated to Australia for a bit to do work there.
Yeah, about 5 years. So I've got a bit of a twang in my accent, I'm told. So trying to shake that as well.
You know, no need to shake. I hear it sometimes, and I go, right. Biggest thing since you came back, has BC changed very much, or?
You know, I'm still getting used to the weather. The snow this winter on the South Coast, that was a big change I had to get used to again.
That's not a fair comparison, though. Really, you know, apples and oranges.
That's right.
Apples and oranges. Okay, well, we'll get you to enjoy our weather soon enough.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you very much. That's Amelia John in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. That actually comes to us from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Great to have her here at CBC in British Columbia. Now, we were talking about Metro Vancouver and questions and concerns from Surrey City Council saying it's gotten too big. Surrey has pulled out of the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy. Richard writes, the first place Metro Vancouver should look into is to find savings in their salaries. Most of the directors are double dipping, paying themselves $500 for a 4-hour Metro Vancouver meeting. Okay, Richard, thank you very much. And writes, it sounds to me like municipalities need more money from the province and federal governments, increased proportion of taxes for upper earners and wealth taxes and corporate taxes. And that's from Anne at bctoday@cbc.ca. Thanks so much for weighing in. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. I see the sun is coming out in Metro Vancouver. Well, after yesterday's confusing comments on tariffs, today U.S. President Donald Trump said 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods will take effect March 4th. Trump posted he will end the month-long pause on those tariffs, claiming he needs to take action because, quote, drugs are still pouring into our country, end quote. That's despite evidence that a crackdown at the border is working. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded today in Montreal.
Thing on tariffs is to emphasize that our government, and indeed all of Team Canada, premiers, business leaders, community leaders, are focused on one thing: making sure that come Tuesday and for the weeks that follow, there are no tariffs imposed on Canada. The tariffs that the President speaks of for next week are centered around the fentanyl crisis that they're facing in the United States, but that we are also facing in Canada. And for months now, I've been emphasizing that less than 1% of the fentanyl that arrives in the United States comes from Canada. But we know that even that 1% or less than 1% should be reduced, which is why we've invested $1.3 billion in strengthening our border capacities with Black Hawk helicopters, with drones, with 10,000 people patrolling our borders and keeping Canadians and Americans safe. And we will continue, as we are this week, with ministers and heads of agencies, including the Commissioner of the RCMP and the head of the CBSA and our fentanyl czar down in Washington to demonstrate that this is an issue that we should be working together on and that Canada is not the source of problems for the United States. We will continue to do that work and do everything necessary to avoid these tariffs coming in. But like I said, if on Tuesday there are unjustified tariffs brought in on Canada, we will have an immediate and extremely strong response, as Canadians expect.
That's Justin Trudeau speaking earlier today in Montreal. Now, also happening today at the White House, the latest Team Canada push to stop those tariffs. This country's public safety minister and its new fentanyl czar, as well as other officials from the Border Agency and the RCMP, are in Washington looking to make their case to their U.S. counterparts, and the Canadian delegation attempting to highlight what they see as early and repeated successes against fentanyl trafficking. Of course, we'll continue to follow this story for you here on CBC. It is 12:39 now. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, February is Black History Month, and it acknowledges the diversity of Black Canadians and the importance of Black leadership and the legacy being built for future generations. We're going to meet a guest in a moment who has been researching and presenting about elements of Black history in Canada, as well as sharing his own personal story as a fourth-generation Canadian and a descendant of a man who escaped on the Underground Railroad. And he says Black history is not as well known here in BC as it is in eastern parts of the country. So we'd love to hear your own story, your own personal history as a Black Canadian in BC. Do you think not enough is known about Black history here in this province, here in the western part of the country? And what do you think British Columbians need to learn? Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Ron Nicholson is a director with the BC Black History Awareness Society, and he's based in Victoria. This month, he's been giving presentations at the Royal BC Museum. And I'm pleased to welcome Ron Nicholson to the show. Hello, Ron.
Hello, Michelle.
Happy.
By the way, I don't see your image on the screen, so
Okay,
just thought I'd let you know that.
Well, thank you very much for letting me know that. I'm not sure that our system actually accommodates that, which I find actually unfortunate, but I know you can imagine that I'm listening intently.
Sure. Very good.
A very happy Black History Month to you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
I would love to get into your family's history in a moment. But first, can you tell me, you've been making these presentations about Black history in Canada. Can you share what motivates you to share this knowledge?
Well, I'd say for the most part, Black history is part of Canadian history, and it's not really been recognized across Canada. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I try to spread the word and educate people, Black, white, and anybody else that might be interested in the history of the country, because it is part of Canada's history.
Mm. And Filipino Canadian like myself.
Mhm.
And I know that you get a question quite often that sort of tells you about how little people know. And what is that question?
Well, a lot of people ask, of course, when I'm meeting them, well, where are you from? And I might say, well, I'm from Ontario, and you get a response on occasion where they say, well, where are you really from? Like I am required to be from Africa or the West Indies or whatever.
How do you feel about that?
So in my case, I'm happy to explain that I was born in Canada, and I'm a fourth generation Canadian. And I've been in Canada or my family has, since 1854, when Canada was a country, or before Canada became a country, which was in 1867. My great grandfather, Adam Nicholson, did escape from slavery. He was a traveler on the Underground Railroad, and he made his way through Philadelphia, and where he received assistance. He traveled with two others at the time, and then Adam ended up traveling on to southern Ontario, and he settled in the Niagara area, where I was born 4 generations later.
And here is that personal history. And this has been passed down to you through oral history, right? This
Yes, for the most part, oral history.
Yeah.
And through my own research, I stumbled on the book called The Underground Railroad, which I consider to be the Bible of the Underground Railroad. And it was written by a gentleman named William Still, who was the president of what was called the Vigilance Committee in Philadelphia. And he was encouraged to write down a lot of fugitives or escaped slaves made their way through Philadelphia, and they were interviewed, and where they came from, what it was like, and where they were going to. And he was convinced to keep records, which he later was talked into publishing, even though it was quite a dangerous thing to even be in possession of the information or any books that had anything to do with slavery and escaped slaves, and et cetera, et cetera. So in 1868, he did publish the book, and in that book actually was one of the places where I found the interview of my great-grandfather, Adam Nicholson.
Wow.
And it's on page 228, and it mentions the interview of the three gentlemen that were traveling and escaping from West Virginia, is where they actually escaped from. And they made their way on, as I said, through Philadelphia, traveling, mostly at night, and by the cars occasionally, which is what we called a section by train or what have you. And they would hide at night in fields and any place, caves, or any place where they could be prevented from being seen by the population or slave catchers during the day. Because after the fugitive slave law, there were what they called slave catchers out there and traveling around through the northern states and trying to catch escaped slaves and send them back to the south and put them back into slavery.
What did you learn further, like looking into not just your great grandfather's story, but overall, what have you learned about the Underground Railroad and its history? And you told us quite a bit there, but what more have you learned about it?
Oh, well, the Underground Railroad, of course, was not actually a railroad. It was a network of routes that people escaped from and the routes that they traveled on. And because of the secrecy, they wanted to keep things secret. They ended up calling it the Underground Railroad. And they used the terminus, they used the terminology of the railroad, like there was a president of the railroad. There was conductors like Josiah Henson or Harriet Tubman were considered conductors of the railroad. They were some of the ones that helped slaves escape and guided them and traveled with them to bring them to the northern states or beyond into Canada. The thing is, one of the things you learn about was I think it was called the Mason-Dixon line, and that was kind of a line between the slave states and the free states. And so once you pass that, for the most part, the slaves were free and could live in the northern states as free men. And when fugitive slave law was passed, which allowed and forced people to turn them in if they saw them, or to allow these slave catchers up into the north, and some even came as far as into Canada. There's one case in the Niagara area, actually Queenston Heights, where there was a woman called Chloe Cooley, I believe was her name. And slave catchers came up into Canada. They crossed the Niagara River and they captured her and took her back across the river and down to the south and sold her back into slavery. And a lot of this was the Simcoe, I think, was the lieutenant governor at the time, or he was so upset by that, and he passed a law that it was once slaves had arrived on Canadian soil, they were free, and it forbade the slave catchers from coming into Canada. And shortly after that, in 1833, the slave abolition law was passed, the abolition in Canada around 1833.
And you mentioned you mentioned Harriet Tubman, who is historically famous as you said, one of the conductors. Now she has a connection to Ontario, to St. Catharines, where you also lived.
Yes, she does. She actually traveled and attended the same church that I grew up attending back in St. Catharines, Ontario. It was called the British Methodist Episcopal Church. It's today it's a historic site. They have plenty of displays and pictures and all kinds of things on the Underground Railroad, and Harriet Tubman herself. There was a plaque put up in front or in the yard beside the church, and you'll see. I actually sent you some of the slides of my PowerPoint presentation on one of my prior presentations.
Yes.
I'm sorry you didn't have time to get into it.
Not this morning, but we'll put it up. We'll put it up. Yeah.
It'll show you some of the things that I've been talking about, and you know, the flight to freedom, the pictures of the Fugitive Slave Act. The other thing is, I think on that PowerPoint, I even have a copy of Freedom Papers, which they escaped slaves or any blacks were required to keep on their person to prove the fact that whether they were free or not.
I see
And
the plaque
sometimes
here.
in spite of that,
Yeah.
you see it?
I see
Yeah.
the plaque, and this is outside, located in the side yard of the church in St. Catharines, and it says Harriet Ross Tubman, 1820 to 1913, and it tells you
Yeah.
more. It starts talking about a legendary conductor on the Underground Railroad. Yeah.
Yeah, so the church is very closely tied to Harriet. One of the sad things, they also built a statue of her, which was in the yard beside the church. And a few years ago, somebody actually knocked the head off of it. And it's been repaired and everything, but there's still this kind of discrimination or whatever towards blacks. It still goes on today, of course, as it goes here and there and
Yeah.
everywhere. Minorities have to deal with those similar types of problems.
And are we just learning about that, Ron? Because I think there's been this sort of feeling that you know, that has not happened in Canada, but in terms of slavery, there was slavery in Canada, you know, and there has been discrimination. Life, you know, was difficult for the Black community as well. Like, can you tell us more about what we need to learn in terms of what has happened here in Canada as well?
Well, as I said, Canada passed the Fugitive Slave Law in I think it was 1833. And even though there was still slavery in Canada at that time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it may have been that people owning slaves could keep them till after they were 25 years of age or a certain age. But basically what it did was disallow the importation of any new slaves coming into Canada. So that was a start, you know, and since then, let's see. I was going to mention there was slavery. There's examples of you know, abuses and discrimination and many other things where not slavery, but more so since then, it was the discrimination and the racism which still exists. A lot of them that came into Canada, they still had to, you know, places where they lived were somewhat segregated. And it took many, many years, I think, before they could consider themselves equals. And I grew up in an area that certain areas of St. Catharines were where the blacks probably lived around the BME church. Another area was the Face the Street area where I grew up. And that had to do with the discrimination at the time. But there was certainly lots of people that were very helpful and to the fugitives that arrived from the States and settled in Canada. There was one, I'm trying to find her name on my papers here. I haven't done this particular presentation for quite some time, but anyway, I think it was a Mrs. Preston. And I did some research in the St. Catharines Public Library where she talked about knowing my great-grandfather, Adam Nicholson.
Oh my goodness.
And seeing the scars on his back and that he obviously had received from when he was in slavery.
Yeah.
And also she described him as a huge man that was very strong, and he could carry 100-pound bags of sugar from the Port de Lucie, the docks in Port de Lucie, to the Niagara area where he lived, which was several miles in that.
Right.
Um,
Ron, can
so,
I ask you, I'm so sorry to jump in. I have about a minute left. What's
Sure.
it like for you? I mean, this is very painful, you know, to hear about what your great-grandfather went through. How is it for you to keep repeating and revisiting these? I have about a couple minutes here, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's fine. As I said, I appreciate the opportunity to give a presentation. I'm sorry ours is so limited, but it helps me spread the word and let people know that all blacks didn't just get off the boat and we're not all recent immigrants. So, a lot of us has been here with every wave of immigration of Europeans. There has basically been some blacks that came at the various times all across the country with every. So it's an opportunity for me to educate people, and it's actually quite interesting too, as well as the sad parts. I can get emotional watching some of the movies or things, but for the most part, I'm happy to share, and people share back with me or to me some of the things that they've read. And
yeah, it's been such
so
a pleasure to speak with you. I really appreciate
well,
it.
thank you for inviting me. As I said, I appreciate the opportunity. And there's a lot of, I have a large number of books on the Underground Railroad and the travels. And there's a lot of information out there, and more people are learning about it, learning about
That's the
Black
good
history
part.
in Canada.
That's the good
And
part. Ron,
we'd like to see it in the schools eventually as
There
part
you
of
go.
the curriculum. That's what we're kind of working on.
Ron, thank you again. What a pleasure to speak
Okay.
with you. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for having me.
Ron
Much
Nicholson,
appreciated.
much appreciate your time. Ron Nicholson with the BC Black History Awareness Society.